You're listening to the Bloodshed Baddies.
Hi, I'm Lex,
And I'm Sam.
And I'm Katherine Schweit.
and we are the Bloodshed Baddies.
All right, Baddies, we're so excited for this episode today because we have such an amazing guest with us, Katherine Schweit. Katherine is a Michigan native like we are and has such an
Woo!
incredible background. Woo woo! She was an FBI specialist, agent executive, a prosecutor, a journalist. She's now a writer, professor, security consultant, and podcaster. So, Katherine, welcome. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That just means I can't hold down a job. So I think that's what
It
it's
sounds
telling
to
you.
me like you've had a pretty awesome life so far.
Yes. Can you
I
expand
do.
on your background a little bit and tell us like how you got to where you are?
Sure. I Since you're from Michigan, I was born in Detroit and raised in Jackson. So
Oh,
mostly
okay.
Jackson. My dad got, a job that moved him from Detroit to Jackson. So I went out to Jackson and became a middle of the mitten person. And so when I grew up, it was a kind of a small town, small town feel. And I went to Michigan State University, a couple of years
Go
at a junior
green.
college. Yeah, go white.
Woo!
Yeah, couple of years at Michigan State. See my drinking glass,
Oh, love it.
Detroit
Yes.
Tigers. Yeah. So I had a opportunity to go to Michigan State. I was working my whole life. I was just going to be a journalist. So I started working out of college. I didn't even go to my graduation. June 6th, I remember, was the graduation date, but it was my first day of work. And I went to work at a newspaper. And I had been working at a newspaper all the way through college. So I was like, that's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. So it didn't exactly work that way, but that's how it started out. And then I worked in Chicago. I took a job as a journalist in Chicago, and pretty much there, part of a work as a newspaper writer is you have to interview a lot of people. And I used to interview and cover city council meetings and county township board meetings. And I always felt like the lawyers were just kind of thinking I was stupid, so they were kind of lying to me. And so I thought, well, I'll just do what a lot of journalists do. I'll just go to law school.
Heck yeah.
So me and everybody else, we all went to law school, right? And so I went to law school. But while I was in law school, a judge offered me a job clerking for $10,000 more than I was getting paid at the
Oh
time.
my
So
Ooh.
gosh.
I know it was like a fortune to me. So I'm like, okay, I'm going. So I left and I went into the prosecutor's office, and it was great. I loved being in the prosecutor's office. I loved working with the justice that I worked for, but she passed away. And so she passed away when I was clerking with her. I went to the prosecutor's office while I was there. My cousin, who was an FBI agent, had lunch with my sister, talked her into getting me to apply because he thought the lawyers were something the FBI was looking for. So I kind of applied on a willy-nilly, and they called and said, we want to interview you. Come in. So it was kind of backdoor, and I ended up in the FBI for 20 years.
That's
Wow, that's
incredible.
so cool.
Yeah, it's just like it just happens. You look back at it and you go, how did that even happen? I think I just kept taking a step forward. That was kind of my thought is you don't really know where you're going, but just keep going forward. I think that was the biggest thing. And I've had so much fun doing it.
That's awesome. And I know you've written books before, but your most recent book you've published this year is Women Who Talk to the Dead. Yes,
It
right there.
is. I got a copy of it to show you. I'm so proud of it.
Cool.
It is. This is just like 2 weeks ago. I mean, it was just released. Women Who Talk to the Dead, and there's been so much buzz about it. I'm so excited.
It
My
sounds
sister,
so amazing.
yeah, I have 100 family members, and one of my sisters who lives in Michigan called, and she's like, "I finished your book last night. It's so amazing."
Yeah,
So, of
so
course,
it's the true story of 200 forgotten murder victims and the relentless pursuit of justice by the FBI agent and Detroit police detective. So what made you go in that route? Because I know your other books were about mass
well,
shooting.
my other books really, when I was in the FBI, my last 5 years in the FBI, as an agent, agents do whatever they're assigned, right? So I I did bank robberies and terrorism cases. I was the terrorist supervisor in Wisconsin when the 9/11, when the planes hit and
Oh my
9/11. So I
gosh.
was their terrorism supervisor. And you do white collar stuff and fraudsters, and you help. And most importantly, you try to help out local law enforcement because, the FBI, federal agencies, we have better, more expansive resources. So an example of that would be that when there was a shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School, that terrible shooting, all those children were killed in Connecticut. That was in December of 2012. And when that shooting occurred, the FBI responded along with many other law enforcement agencies. And President Obama was the president at the time. He asked Mr. Biden, his vice president, to put together a team to work with his office to see what we knew about these kind of shootings and what we could do to, help the state and locals who were the ones responding, who were the ones impacted, right? The state and local police, but also schools and parents and cities and towns, and so the federal government isn't the one it's not their building and their people getting hit, right? So our job has always been, when I was in the FBI, was always to look how you can help out locally. And, that's what I had done during 9/11 as a terrorism supervisor. So what happened is that, 5 years before I was scheduled to retire, because they kind of kick you out after a certain time, I got pulled from what I was working on to be the FBI's lead for mass shootings. And, I guess like I was walking down the hallway the wrong way in headquarters or something. Sometimes we call it voluntold. And so I was kind of voluntold. And so I became really the FBI's expert in mass shootings and school shootings and active shooters. And then eventually, one of the nation's and one of the world's experts in it, just because that's all I've done since 2012. When I retired, the FBI, you do have to leave at a certain age and time. And so I had to leave in 2017. But then thought I'd go back to writing, and I started to write this book. And I was constantly getting called to, every time a shooting happened, news was calling, or, companies were calling, asking for advice, or universities and county, state officials. And so my book agent at the time said, why don't you just write all that stuff in your head down in a book, and then you won't have to think about it again. So I did that. That's what this book is. That's the first book.
Wow.
It was called Stop the Killing: How to End the Mass Shooting Crisis. And I wrote that book, and what it did is it prompted more people to call, which was really not the plan. So this book actually came out initially in a hardback, and then I updated it in a soft cover because the hardback company that I worked with the agent, it was an expensive book, and I think it needed to be cheaper. It needed to be something that, if a mom wanted to buy it, so that they felt comfortable about how to keep their kids safe in school, or if you wanted to buy it because you're the security director at your local church, you need to be able to buy something that's got a workbook, a roadmap for what to do and best practices, but it's not going to be too expensive. So I published it myself and then kind of went from there. So that's pretty much all I do now is, give advice and counsel on security matters, and hopefully help the cause. And I've seen changes, but that's maybe for another conversation. I've seen the improvements. It's hard for other people to see the improvement, but we've made vast improvements since Sandy Hook.
Wow, that's so incredible.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Mass shootings, it's in my head. It's all I do, mass shootings.
So let's talk about this new book.
Yeah, I'd love to. It is really a book of kind of a crime of passion, my own passion, right? To do this book. It is a book called Women. If you're fortunate enough to be seeing this instead of just listening to it, it is called Women Who Talk to Dead. And on the front cover is a picture of two women, Leslie Larsen, the blonde, and the dark-haired person, Shannon Jones. And Leslie Larsen is an FBI agent, and Shannon Jones is a Detroit police detective. And Leslie, when I worked as a terrorism supervisor in Milwaukee, in the Milwaukee, Wisconsin office, Leslie was a young kid in college, and she was finishing college She came to the FBI and took a job sorting mail and emptying trash cans because she wanted to be an FBI agent. And she
Wow.
had a plan. And she had a plan since she was very young, which I actually put in the book because I was so inspired by her. And so I worked with her when she was very young. And as her career progressed, she would often call me. And eventually I came to become, her mentor through the years. And so even in the latest years of my career, when she had moved through and become a crime scene expert, she's one of the top, forensics people in the FBI when it comes to crime scene management and evidence collection. She manages one of the three largest, busiest teams of the evidence recovery teams, the ERTs, evidence response teams, they call them, but they collect the DNA, they collect bones, they collect footprints, they collect, you name it, something in a search scene. They do all of that. They look for people who are missing. In Michigan, they look for Jimmy Hoffa.
Oh,
As you
wow.
know, she's the lead on the team that's looking for Jimmy Hoffa whenever they get a tip.
That's amazing.
So Leslie called me one day many years ago and said she was having trouble trying to work through some things, and what did I think? And she started to tell me this story of what she was working on and what Detroit police had asked them to do. And the end of the story is when she told me the story of what they were thinking of doing, I was gobsmacked about how amazing it was and how I thought they couldn't possibly do it. I didn't tell her that. And I was just very ambitious. And so I followed with her while she talked about it and through the years as she worked on it. And eventually I came into Detroit to document what turned out to be this book, Women Who Talk to the Dead. And it's a story about the FBI and the Detroit Police Department deciding that they are going to dig up 200 unidentified murder victims in order to get the DNA from their bones, because they were all buried without names. They're all paupers, no idea who they are, no DNA to look up. So
Wow.
it's a pretty amazing story. Even when I know it, I think it's a pretty amazing story.
That is
That had
so
to be
incredible.
so meaningful for all of their families.
Yeah, I think that it's one thing that's significant is the I think as an investigator, and I worked before I came into the FBI, I was a prosecutor. Your victims come into your courtroom and they come there because they're so aggrieved. They've lost a son or they've lost a mother, and they advocate for that person who they've lost. But this is a story where the only people advocating for these identified murder victims were law enforcement officers who said, we're not going to forget these people that are in the ground already, that are in paper files of unidentified dead murder victims. And they said, law enforcement said, we're going after these people and we're going to reconnect them with families. We're going to use DNA, we're going to use genetic genealogy, whatever we can to reconnect them with family members who maybe thought they were missing. Maybe they walked away from the house and no idea that their family member, in fact, never came back because he or she was murdered.
Wow. Can't even imagine it. And I feel like it's so incredible that like these two women were like spearheading it and were passionate enough to like do this.
Yeah, when I first talked to Leslie and Shannon Jones about it, the idea of just writing a story, I thought, well, this is a really impressive thing that you guys are doing. I didn't realize that it would take 5 years of going back to the cemetery, 5 years of going back to dig up graves, 5 years of finding people who would volunteer their time to bring food and water, 5 years of looking for the equipment and the funding to be able to get to purchasing tents so they could put them up and so they could work in them, 5 years of having police officers, county sheriff's deputies come out and help with traffic and lifting things, lifting caskets out. Detroit Edison brought over excavators. And so I was out there at the cemetery and I really wanted to convey through the book how much work it took just to do this. Because I think a lot of times we see a story about one person who's identified through DNA, and I don't know that we necessarily know how that came to be. That's why I wanted to write this book. I think that we hear the stories in the news when somebody says, oh, DNA has matched this person, and now we're solving this missing person case or this murder. But how did you get the DNA? This book tells you how they got it, what the hurdles were. And, you mentioned the two women. When I first started to interview Leslie and Shannon, every time I talked to them, I'd say, well, who else should I talk to? And they would give me another name, and it would be another female. And eventually I'd loop back around for more interviews. I'm like, is everybody doing this a woman? Well, no, there's some guys there, but basically our prosecutor's a female, our Emmy's a female, our forensic anthropologists are female. Yeah, I guess a lot of females. That was kind of it was the reflection.
That is so amazing.
I tried to share that as I wrote it too, about kind of how that came about and the personalities of these individuals. So it was kind of fun, a tough book to write, but fun.
I feel like too with like shows like CSI and NCIS, the DNA collection and testing, they make it look so easy. You don't. Yeah, to the layperson, you're like, oh, they just grabbed this little blood speck and ran it through a machine and found out who it was. So I think it's so great that you're like bringing light to like how much work this is actually involved in this and what it actually is like.
Yeah, a lot of the I think that's true, that when I watch television shows, because I've been in a lot of crime scenes, and when I look at the television shows, and everything is so simple, and it just takes a few minutes, and somebody comes in and walk. My favorite part where everybody comes in the opening scene and they walk all over the crime scene. My head says, stop doing that. But it's TV. It's okay. It's TV. It's okay. But it is a challenge. And I think that one of the things I wanted to do in the book was, I love people who are interested in the true crime aspects of it, and who want to read the mysteries and want to solve crimes. And so, the book certainly talks about some of the victims by name and the murders and who they think did them and things like that. But there'll be more to come. There's still, these are live cases. Like, there's still a lot of cases open. As they continue to get the DNA results back. They're continuing to work the cases. And I think a lot of times people who watch true crime, read true crime, are fascinated by the mystery and solving the mystery. They don't sometimes even know how they can help and what it takes to get to where. So part of what I put into the book was, here's who and how you can kind of help so they can be involved and they have a better understanding of how cases come together. It will help anybody who likes true crime understand the other true crime books they're reading, or the podcasts they're watching, or the television shows or the movies.
Which is so incredibly helpful.
Cool. Yeah.
Yes. And then you mentioned that you said that this was like ongoing, right? They're open cases. So can we possibly expect a second book from you with more on this topic?
Nobody's ever asked me that before.
I'm sorry.
But maybe so, because I think it's important to tell the stories of the victims and their families as they like to have them told. And so I am going to be keeping track of the cases that the Detroit Police Department and the others, Shannon Jones, who is with DPD, initially started Detroit cases, but the burials were in Wayne County cemeteries. So eventually she decided that any outstanding murder case in Wayne County, even if it wasn't in her own city, they would make sure to dig up the bones for it.
That's amazing.
Shannon's amazing.
I especially feel like, Detroit gets this bad rep and they've had these money issues over the years. And for something like this, that does take so much time and resources to be able to happen is such, like, I think it just shows how Detroit, that we're fighters. The cities are fighters.
Woo.
I agree. I agree. It's definitely, I'm a little bit older than you guys, just a little bit, a lot, but
No.
I, but I remember, Detroit in different ways. And also my parents were both born in Detroit. So their parents came to Detroit. They emigrated to Detroit for the auto industry jobs. That's, like
Oh,
back
wow.
then that was a thing. And it was good money to be made, and the auto industry was all out there doing. And so that's how my family came to Detroit, one from Canada and one from the St. Louis area.
Oh,
So
wow.
they came to Detroit. My folks met. So they were very much Detroiters. I grew up hearing hilarious stories of their childhood and their adulthood. They both went to college at Wayne State.
Oh,
Um,
that's where I went.
yeah. Oh, you did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Belle Isle, stories about Belle Isle, photographs. I have these lovely pictures of my folks, just what you would expect because they were a lot older. Black and white pictures of a car pulled up at Belle Isle with the back trunk open and a blanket on the ground, and these women in kind of, nice cotton dresses, but appropriate length, sitting on the blanket, and the men with jackets and ties and stuff, just very old fashioned. And,
Mm.
so I have really, Detroit means a lot to me. And I thought that was, for me, that's the other part of it is I grew up in a state and I was from a town that people would say, oh, Detroit. And I live on the East Coast now near Washington, D.C., which is where I transferred when I became an executive. And I heard those things and I wanted people to understand how cool Michigan is and how cool Detroit is, and how tough the people in Michigan are.
Yes.
Yeah.
How Detroiters don't give up and Michiganders don't give up. And I still put my little hand up and say, "This is where I'm from," and I point on my
So
hand, and then they
we
say, "What are you talking about?" So I do it anyway.
Yes.
we do the
Yes.
same.
I think the book, I try to celebrate in the book the resilience of Detroit and bring in some of that history for people, particularly for people who aren't from there. Uh,
Yes.
so they'll know.
I love
Like
that.
Rabbi.
I know you mentioned how you talked about some of the identified bodies in their stories, and I know we only have like a short time left. So is there any that really stuck with you?
To read the
That you-
book.
all
You have
right,
to
all
read the
right. It's
book.
good. It's a good plug. Let's read the book, Baddies.
You have to read the book, Women Who Talk to the Dead, available at wherever you buy your books. But I would say this: there are some amazing stories. I mean, when a child loses a parent and doesn't know why, it changes their life forever.
Oh my gosh,
Um,
yeah.
and I will say this: no matter where you're listening to this, the book is available anywhere. You don't have to buy it on Amazon if you don't want to buy it on Amazon. My suggestion would be go back to the place where you like to buy your books, or go find your local bookstore and ask them to order it. If you can spell my last name, Schweit, you can find the book, or you can go to katherineschweit.com and find links through there. But go to your local bookstore; they'll find it for you. They can order it. They have the access to do that through the way I put the book into the systems so that it can be ordered any place in the world.
That's
That's
amazing.
incredible.
Yes. Go support your local bookstores.
Yes, and we'll
Big
definitely
fan.
link your website and places to find the book in this episode.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thanks.
So
And also, if you don't want to buy it, go to your library and ask them to order it, because a lot of libraries order books too, and sometimes people don't think to do that. And like I take books into town. Like next time I was in Detroit 2 weeks ago, but next time I come into town now that the book is out, I'll take a half a dozen copies of the book and I'll take it to the Detroit library so it's there if people want to read it. It's also on ebook. It's also, I would say it's an audiobook, except for we're just finishing the audiobook. So we're just like doing the final edits on it. I mean, I'm not reading it; somebody else is. But anyway,
That's amazing. So my last question for you today is, I guess, what do you just hope readers take away from this book? Our listeners who get
think
it.
I think your listeners, your viewers, I want them to understand that law enforcement never gives up, even when others do. This was Nobody in law enforcement had to do this, but they chose to, solely for the victims. That's pretty impressive about these two women and the people who
1,000.
supported them.
Yeah.
Well, I think These women are so impressive. Everyone needs to go read this book to find out. I think you are so impressive with everything you've
Thank
been
you.
doing. We are
You're
so
kind.
happy you're on here. We want to be your friend forever. And just thank you
I
so
like it.
much.
I like it. I would, you know what? I do a podcast called Stop the Killing. And if it works out, I mean, if you guys have time, I'd love to have you on the podcast also to talk about what it's like to do a podcast like this and the value that you think you bring to the table. So
We
let's
would
see
love
if we can
that.
work that out.
Yeah,
Okay.
that would be
Yes.
so fun.
You guys have a great day.
Thank
You
you so
too.
much. You too. It was so great. Have a good
Bye.
one. Yeah,
Thanks.
get the
Take
book,
care.
everybody.
Pick up a book, Women Who Talk to the Dead. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Well, baddies, thank you so much for listening to our episode with Katherine, who is such a baddie. We love her. We're going to link all of her social medias, all of her websites, all of her books in the bio. So make sure you go check her out. Make sure you follow us wherever you're listening to the podcast and maybe give us a nice review, and then go over and find Katherine's podcast and give her a nice review as well. And you can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok at Bloodshed Baddies.
You can send us an email with a case suggestion or story to bloodshedbaddies@gmail.com. Intro music made by Cousin Vinny. Tell your friends about our podcast and about the incredible Katherine Schweit, and tune in next week for a new episode.
Woo woo! We love you guys, and we love Katherine.
Woo!